All right, this is a perfect day to get Dan Szymborski from FanGraph back on the show. Jon and Jim, San Diego Sports 760. Dan, we appreciate you taking time. Obviously, the big news over the offseason now, or recently, was Roki, but we found out within the hour or so about Jurickson Profar. And I know you do the projections at FanGraphs, and I don't know where you are with spring training still about 3 weeks away. But are there Zips projections yet out? And what does it look like from like the NL West perspective as you lay out the Dodgers and the Padres specifically for 2025? And thanks for hopping on.
Well, I haven't done the final projections yet, or the preliminary final projections. Okay. The Padres generally project as the second best team in the NL West. I think we can guess what the first best team is
Rockies.
In the NL West, at least in the projections. Oh, yeah, the Rockies. It's going to be big times for the Rockies. Herman Marquez going to win 25 games. No, the Padres are competitive, but the Dodgers have done a lot. They've improved kind of their downside. It's a pretty stacked team, although there are weaknesses.
When you look at the deal that Profar just got, 3 years, $42 million, according to his projections, do you feel like that's a fair deal for him?
That's about right on target. He's kind of a league average-ish corner outfielder. Obviously, he was better than that in 2024, but teams pay for the future, not the past. No one wants to pay for 2024 unless they're going to get that in 2025. And he was terrible in 2023. He was down in 2021. He had a decent 2022, but even though he had a star level 2024, teams weren't going to pay based on that. And you see that a lot with players who don't have a lot of defensive value. You see the Pete Alonso market not really developing. You see Christian Walker just getting an ordinary deal. So that's about the market value for Profar.
Dan Szymborski, FanGraphs with us right now, Jon and Jim. So in your opinion, is this a miss for the Padres? As in, this won't be easily replicatable, so to speak, right, for A.J. Preller to find someone. Now, again, to your point, maybe Profar can't replicate it either, but how does Preller make up for the lost production of Profar?
Well, the problem is, on some level, they were always going to have to make up some of it. If you think of him as a 4-win player last year, he was probably going to be a 2-win player this year. So you're already going into an offseason, even if he comes back, having to replace those wins. So then the question becomes, do you make a trade? Is there something you can work out with another team? Or do you have to look at what's remaining in free agency? And there's not a lot out there anymore in free agency. It's kind of dwindled considerably. Anthony Santander was one of the last really exciting free agents. Now you're down to kind of the Alex Verdugo tier, which isn't that exciting. Austin Hayes, Harrison Bader. It's not a deep market. I would probably want to look for a trade first if you can wing that kind of thing, if you have the right matchup with another team. But I'm not sure that they really can do that much in free agency at this point.
Sounds promising. Moving over to Michael King, he's about to go to arbitration with the Padres. It's the first time a player's gone to arbitration with A.J. Preller as their general manager. But when the biggest thing here is like the projections for Michael King, it's hard to project because there's really not many players to compare him to. So when you look at Michael King and his outlook here for next season and into free agency, what type of deal would he garner if he was a free agent at this very moment in time?
I think he'd get a really, not a Blake Snell-esque deal or anything. That would be kind of a little silly to project that, but he would get a pretty substantial offer because the Padres took the gamble in converting him back into a full-time starter, and it worked out incredibly well. You could say that he was a little version of Crochet last year because even though he didn't get quite the press that Crochet did, he actually did the similar thing. He came back from relief to go back into starting and was very good. And he's going to be looking at a substantial offer. And I'm not sure that the Padres, if they really want to try to not get too far past where their payroll is now, I don't know how they work that out. That's an interesting problem, I guess.
It's become really kind of the problem of the offseason. Like, how do they sustain the success they had in 2024, even in 2025, if they're trying to shed payroll coming off a 93-win season, which was their most regular season wins since 1998. Now, obviously here, Dan Szymborski from FanGraph is with us. on Jon and Jim. As you know, the Roki Sasaki saga played out in Southern California all offseason. A lot of people thought he was going to end up potentially in San Diego. Ultimately, the favorite lands him in the Dodgers. What are the projections on Sasaki from day one in the major leagues?
They're not quite. They're more on the level, at least from my projections. They're on the level of Imanaga, who Zips really did like, but not quite on Yamamoto's level. He's not quite as finished a product, not quite as polished. So there is some risk there, but any team who could get him wanted him for very good reason. The interesting thing about the Dodgers is they actually still don't project as well as they did going into 2021. There are some downsides to the team. They have pretty incredible depth at this point, especially in the starting pitching when you look at the arms they have around. But you look at that offense, and there is some risk there, not because the guys aren't very good, but you do have a team that their core is kind of getting past 30 into their declining years. So it's not a lot, but this is not an invincible team.
Well, I like hearing that, even though on paper it seems like they're going to win 130 games. And
well, real quick on that, because Dan came on last year, and we were like, "This division's over, right?" And this was later when you had the projections. Like, no, not really. There's like an 80 to 90% chance, but that leaves like a 10 or 20% outlier.
Yeah.
And then we were talking. I mean, we're in the middle of September. The Padres. I mean, they finished 5 fewer wins than LA.
So yeah, 98, 93. Yeah.
You know, so like again, you don't have it yet, Dan, but I mean, they're not going to be a 99% chance of winning the division, right, heading into the season, or will they?
No, nobody really is, unless you take a major league team and put them in AAA or something.
Right.
People tend to underestimate the risks that any team, any player has.
Right.
And that's where you see these things happen, where things just fall apart. It hasn't happened to the Dodgers yet. And what they've done, some of these signings they've made, Sasaki, the relievers, it's not so much increasing their top end win count, because they've kind of reached that point where they have diminishing marginal returns from every additional player they add, because you can't start 12 guys. What they've done is they've kind of limited their floor, so to speak. There's almost no chance, say, that they only go like 80 and 82 or something. Their depth is just too much for that, so that's a very low chance. They've insulated themselves. But this isn't a team that's going to go into the season projected to win 115 games or anything crazy like that. The Padres will enter the season with a realistic but a significant underdog chance of winning the division.
Jackson Merrill put together an amazing season last year. Coming up on his sophomore season, we saw a massive dip with Corbin Carroll, a guy that had a breakout rookie year, and his sophomore season was not good. Do you have any concern about that happening with Jackson Merrill going into his sophomore year here in San Diego?
I wouldn't call it concern. It's, people call it the sophomore slump, but that's not really a thing. What you tend to happen is that the guys who had the best rookie seasons are probably the ones that had the most things go their way, because unlucky rookies end up in AAA after hitting 100 for the first couple weeks of the season, which is, say, Jackson Holiday. So you could look at Merrill, and it's likely his numbers will regress toward the mean a little bit, but he should still be a really, really good player and continue improving from that point. You see that a lot. You see players who take steps forward do take steps back. I ran the numbers a few weeks ago, and if you look at all the players under 25 who had 4 WAR seasons, more than 70% of them had significantly worse performance the following season. It's just the way it is. So Merrill's, probably a 3-win or a 4-win player, so it shouldn't be taken as a slight on him if he takes a small step back, because he is going to be a big piece of the Padres for a long time.
Final one for me, Dan, is on Dylan Cease, because a year ago, it would have been hard for me to believe that you can trade Juan Soto and get quote unquote better, but they did. They won 93 games. They got to the NLDS. I mean, can they move Dylan Cease in an effort to shed Payroll and then replicate that? Can they move Dylan Cease and get better?
They might be able to. I don't know if they could get better in 2025 by trading Cease. I think that the Soto trade worked out about as well as any trade of that type can work out. You're not going to probably, land on the free parking on Monopoly every time like they did with Michael King last year. But I think what they had to do is they had to look at their payroll long term and see where their needs are and how much they can spend. Because one of the problems the Padres had is they kind of hit the maximum payroll they wanted to spend like halfway through their contention window. And what happens, generally speaking, with the team that's in contention is that team gets more and more expensive. Their young players hit arbitration. Their players in arbitration hit free agency, and they had to make hard decisions. They didn't really leave a top for them to go to. They didn't leave money reinforcements, so to speak. There is a way they can get better, but it might not necessarily be for 2025.
Great insight. As always, we love having
Thanks,
you on. Dan Szymborski, baseball's coming. The Padres truck is left for Peoria. Yeah. We'll see how many wins are inside that truck in 2025. Dan, thanks for hopping on in San Diego. We'll do it again soon, all right?
Always fun, guys. Thanks for having me.
Great stuff from Dan Szymborski. We will react to that.
It's at least a 4-war bus.
Yes. Well, hopefully. You said what? With Jackson Merrill?
No, it's a joke that fell flat.
Yeah, it really did.
All right. If Jackson takes a step back next year, which is very likely.
Wait, time out real quick. Ichiro went from 7.7 rookie year, 7.7 WAR MVP.
Is that good?
To 3.6. I mean, that's a significant. Now, it's still awesome. 4 WAR season.
What was Jackson's WAR last year?
It was awesome, wasn't it? It was over 4, I think. Let's see. Jackson Merrill's 4.4. So you take, 30% off. I mean, you go from 4.5 to 3, 4.5 to 2.5, plus no Profar that we just talked about. Mm-hmm. So you're already making up for his lost 4 WAR.
And you can't really afford to have Jackson have a down year. Like if he's in the middle of the season hitting 240 with like 8 home runs and like 35 RBIs with an OPS of like 720.
Right. So you're almost counting on him to do more because you have less.
Yes, because you need him to maintain that level of play next year. If you just lost, which you did, an all-star left fielder, and if you're not going to get that production in left field next year, then you need to maintain that production in center, and you also need to have a better year from Tatis. Tatis needs to stay healthy. If Jackson takes a step back, okay, so be it. But Tatis needs to be healthy then. If Jackson takes a step back, but Tatis is healthy and hits 38 home runs for you, then it like kind of evens out the production between Tatis and Merrill.
Right.
But if Merrill's going to take a step back and Tatis can't stay healthy again, like that is going to be a big problem.
Well, someone that is maybe one day destined for Cooperstown is going to have to play like it. I'm not even saying Machado. I'm like, Tatis, go hit the 40 home runs you hit 4 years ago. Manny, go have a career year as a 31, 32-year-old. It's possible. Jackson Merrill, maybe you follow suit with the year. But you're right. I mean, if Merrill doesn't do it and you don't have Profar, like somebody's going to have to like take matters into their own hands. Xander Bogaerts, go be the all-star caliber player you were in Boston.
That's a huge question mark.
But someone's got to do it.
It's a big if. And hearing Preller talk during his post-year press conference, that was the one thing that stood out to me the most, is him saying they expect Xander to return to his all-star form. Right. Meaning, if he doesn't, that's a problem. And that they need it in the worst way. They signed Profar. No, sorry. Profar's on my mind. They signed Xander to this all-star level contract. You got to be an all-star. You got to give the production of what you're paying the guy. If he's giving you years like this past year for $28 million a season, that's a disaster.
Right.
You got to give this team at least close to what they're paying you. Because if not, then it's just going to hurt. It's going to be a trickle-down effect and hurt everything with your team.
I'm trying to think what else he said. I mean, I thought there was a glimmer of hope, truthfully, like for Padre fans. He's like, listen, the Dodgers are not a 99% favorite to win the division. There's not a 1 in 100 chance. Like he just said, their floor is higher than most floors, but they still have to stay healthy. Their win total is not going to be projected at 115. Right? That's not where they are heading into the season. And he also said something that I don't think people are fully convinced of, which is the Padres will enter the year as the second best team in the NL West. Not Arizona and not San Francisco. He said, per his projections, not finalized, the Padres will enter the year as the second best team in the NL West. I feel as if that's significant because, again, oftentimes we're worried about, they've lost this or they haven't added that, but they're retaining their core. I mean, a lot is returning. A lot is returning in 2025.
I said this the other day. running down the list of the players that are returning, it's a good list. Pitching, Cease, King, Darvish. That's a really good 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, maybe if they return.
If they do. Back into your bullpen. Robert Suarez, Jason Adam, Jeremiah Estrada. Really good. Top 4 of the lineup. Luis Ariz, Fernando Tatis Jr., Jackson Merrill, Manny Machado. Really good. And then you have pieces that hopefully have bounce backs in Xander Bogaerts and Jake Cronenworth. That's really good. The problem is the holes they have are craters, like the size of the craters on the moon, because you get left field, catching, bench, back into rotation. Those are big problems. And I don't know if this team can, overcome those problems, because last year the problems this team had with the main pieces were picked up by the other players, the Jackson Merrills, the Kyle Gashiokas, the Matt Waldrons of the world. Like, those guys really picked this team up when they needed it. Now you're asking guys like Terso Ornelas and Brett Sullivan and whoever else is on their bench to help with picking up that slack, and that's tough.